Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Boruto Manga Chapter review. This one's going to be for Chapter 76, which is called A Girl's Sanctuary. So, there was a bit of hype going into this chapter because Chapter 75 was probably one of the best chapters we've ever had of Boruto. But I think you had to know coming out of that chapter that there was no way that chapter was going to be the sort of new normal for chapters, just because it was primarily a lore and information chapter, and you can't do that every single week. My point that I think I made in comments online when talking about this was that basically, sure, you can't do chapter 75 every week, but the manga, for the sake of the manga going forward, the chapters need to be better than they had been before chapter 75 consistently. And this chapter, chapter 76, I think is good, solid, not incredibly blown away. Did I think it was a really, really strong follow-up to chapter 75? Not necessarily. It sort of went back to sort of where we were more at after chapter 74, in that a lot of the big reveals are just sort of left there to be referred to at a later point, and we really did just skip past it and get back into the sort of Ada romance kind of plot as the core dynamic, in that, like, we still haven't come back to Code in quite a while. So there are a few little things like that at the moment that feel like, you know, you're not completely convinced by the direction that they're heading in. But, like I've always said, even in the times when I felt we were at one of the worst points in Boruto, like, just like a few chapters ago, there's always been a huge potential with this manga. And I think chapter 75 showed you that we can eventually get to some really, really strong stuff. And even, I think, relatively soon, we'll probably get there. But I think the chapters need to probably consistently be a little bit better than this chapter, and then that's about the kind of area you need to be in most months. That's the kind of main point I would make here, that look, I understand why this chapter is a step down, and we'll get back to the big stuff referenced in the previous chapter, but it was a huge shift back to see it actually happen here. So anyway, so we open up this chapter with Boruto, of course, and we basically get a partial explanation for what the visions were from the end of the last chapter. And as expected, it does seem to be that Boruto, because he's now connected with Momoshiki, is gaining more access to all of Momoshiki's abilities, which includes his Byakugan's ability to see a little bit into the future and basically sense the destiny of people around him. But the question here is, like, what has exactly happened here? Usually that only works on people except him, but I guess, like I even said, I think in the review, this seems to be some unusual dynamic where, because Momoshiki was a separate person to Boruto, and now Boruto just has Momoshiki as sort of like part of him, their powers in a way merging to become one means that Boruto basically gets access to see his own destiny. And so he's getting a glimpse, I think, like they tease here, of what the situation is surrounding the whole "those blue eyes shall eventually take everything from you," as they reference here. That seems to all but confirm that whatever was happening at the end of last chapter in the kind of flash forwards, it is referencing what Momoshiki knows is about to happen. Anyway, from there we cut back to talking to Amado. And we're very much at the end of this discussion. There's not too much interesting stuff with Amado here, but it's basically just some final clarifications about some things of, like, okay, here's effectively a recap of what you told us about your daughter and Kawaki's karma from last chapter. Shikamaru does ask Ada to be like, Akebi was like a good person, wasn't she? And Ada's like, yeah, she was just an ordinary girl. It should be fine, basically. Amado once again defends himself from this, of just like, hey, I'm just a normal person. And I think this is fine. This has been the characterization of Amado, that because of what he revealed in the last chapter, it basically revealed, hey, you've been keeping stuff from us. What makes us think that you're not still keeping stuff from us. So I understand why Shikamaru is taking this approach of being like, hey, it's taking you this long to finally tell us all this stuff. There's probably a couple other things that we also don't know either. So Naruto decides to more or less kind of back away from all this, and it's just kind of like, this seems like a personal matter between you and Kawaki, so I'll just kind of let you guys handle this yourself. Amado does bring up the idea of just like, I just wanted to move along the process towards getting my daughter back because I know Kawaki hates karma. And this is where we do get an interesting thing with Kawaki, where he looks down at the karma mark and is just like, yeah, I've hated karma, that's for sure. I only ever thought about getting rid of it because I considered it the main cause of all the crappy stuff that had happened to me. But I was wrong. The true cause was those Otsutsuki who embedded the karma in me. If it weren't for them, I'd probably have ended up the punching bag of these monsters with crazy abilities either. Wouldn't have ended up that way. And most of all, Lord Seventh's life wouldn't have been threatened. So this is, I think, an important little character shift in the motivations of Kawaki, of him kind of realizing that him having the karma back isn't necessarily the problem. His hatred shouldn't be directed in that direction. It should more be in the direction of like, karma comes from Otsutsukis, and the whole reason he's involved in this is because these power-wanting, loving creatures, the Otsutsukis, are the ones who have involved him in everything. So it seems Kawaki's anger and hatred now is being more directed specifically at the Otsutsukis. So that's an interesting one given what they do right at the end of the chapter. I think you can sort of see the direction they're maybe heading in. But anyway, he does ask one question. The daughter that you plan to resurrect with my karma, you swear that she won't turn into some new Otsutsuki. And there's an interesting little thing here where we get like Amado takes off his glasses, kind of looks a little bit at the ground, covers his face with his hand, and is like, to be absolutely frank, I really don't know how it'll turn out since there's no precedent. The only thing that's certain is that this is my final option. And it's one of those things where it's like, does it mean anything that he didn't like look Kawaki straight in the eyes and say that? Or was this just a way to showcase very much that Amado is quite emotional, the fact that he can only look down and almost like consider the fact that, like, in a way, what if my final option fails type situation. I think that's maybe what he's thinking about a little bit here. But then we just have a kind of recap highlighting that, oh yeah, like Sumire, Sarada, Mitsuki, Konohamaru, Delta are all watching from like across the way, basically. They're involved in this as well. And Ada's just like, hey, should we call it a day here? Sure. Yeah, you know, you just arrived today. Sure, we can talk tomorrow, basically. And there's a lot of looks of like, we see that Amado still hasn't looked up again from this. Naruto seems quite concerned about Amado. But then at nighttime we see here Boruto is lost in thought over, they shall eventually take everything from you, his blue eyes. So knowing that this day is fast approaching. We then see Ada in bed using her ability to basically monitor what Kawaki is doing. And then we cut to the kind of next morning at breakfast, basically. And so the rest of the chapter, for the most part, is just sort of laser focused on, I would say, characterizing Ada in a more normal setting. Trying to, I suppose, normalize, like, what is her core personality when she's not, like, you know, using her powers to sort of fully control situations and stuff like that. She's still a little bit sort of, like, demanding here, but it's maybe becoming clear that that perhaps is just part of her personality, or just because she's always had the powers that just has developed to become part of her personality. So Boruto asked the question of like, I'm a potential match for you too if Otsutsuki are the only people that you're actually interested in having like a relationship with. So why are you so focused and have basically chosen Kawaki already? And you see Demon and Boruto have a little bit of banter back and forth here. But the answer to this question is, I suppose, what we probably expected, and that is that Ada is older than Boruto by a reasonable age gap, and so she doesn't really consider that to be quite a possibility, at least right now anyway. She says, you're only 12, I'm 16 already. Boruto does say, shouldn't age not matter? And I know some people have been reacting to this. I think the Boruto's point in all of this is that, if you have only two people to choose from, does it matter that we have a 4-year age gap? Given that, will that mean as much in a bunch of years' time type thing? That she shouldn't be ruling out Boruto, right now, just because right now the age gap is somewhat significant. But again, I think they're just kind of highlighting that Ada Boruto is not at all a direction they're going in. I think that's ultimately what you're meant to take from this, is that she appreciates having someone who can speak and interact with her normally. So she knows quite clearly that that's the case. And that's really the whole point of this, is that she doesn't really have those feelings for Boruto. She does say, you're wonderful too, but you're only 12. Kawaki then speaks up, and interestingly we get the fun dynamic where Kawaki doesn't really have much of a problem talking to her, but she freezes up every time she has to talk to him or he talks to her. But it's quite blunt what Kawaki says here, just basically figuring out that, wait, you were in a partnership with Code, and I know what he wants to do. He hates me, and me or Boruto has to be fed to the Ten Tails for him to accomplish what he wants. So he doesn't go after me. That means you basically had to agree that Boruto would be fed to the Ten Tails to make that deal with Code. That's what happened, isn't it, Ada? And she's just he said my name. She's just doing the typical kind of blushing thing where she's not at all able to really react much to what he's saying in a serious sense. But Kawaki takes this as being basically confirmation that, yeah, what he said is true. And it does reveal to the whole table, I suppose, that this is the situation. Is that, I guess, Ada is so focused on Kawaki as the potential romantic interest that, what would she do? What wouldn't she do to make that actually happen? And the idea that she's already shown a little bit of a sense that she's willing to sell Boruto out. Will she do it again in some sort of situation like this? So that's somewhat interesting. Again, more kind of banter here between Demon, Kawaki, and Boruto, as Ada slams her hands down at the table and basically demands that, yeah, I need some girls in this room. I can't express myself properly like this. And she's just like, oh yeah, Sarada and Sumire are over there. Bring them over. And she's just super demanding and just immediately changes the dynamic, that it was all planned out, that basically for security reasons, Ada would be living with Boruto and Kawaki because they can actually go against Ada without much problem, even though of course Code is there to... Demon is there to protect her, but still, they are the only people immune to her charms, or so it seems. But this is kind of the big reveal of this chapter, is that, hey, it's not as simple as just everyone except Otsutsuki succumb to her charms, and that's what we're going to see here. So Sarada prepares herself to go in. Mitsuki's like, should I go too? But Konohamaru is like, no, you're too susceptible, so am I. That's why we can't go in. So the two girls end up going off. So many characters. Delta has to stay behind. Shikadai does say oh yeah, my dad said I could go in too because I wasn't affected by her charms when she first arrived. So we're going to head in. And they're all kind of relieved that oh cool, Shikadai's coming in with us. So they immediately cut next page to the three of them walking in the door, and Shikadai immediately in front of Ada is just sort of sweating, blushing, can't string a sentence together, and she's immediately like, nice to meet you, but please go home. And he does exactly that. So we are quickly left with just the new additions to the house are Sarada and Sumire. So they do sort of notice sort of straight away that oh, what's going on here? Is it just that Shikadai didn't get a good look at her when she first arrived? That basically confirming that's how the powers work, that you have to, I suppose, get at least a decent glance at Ada to be affected by her charms, which makes complete sense ultimately. I don't think that's much of a reveal. It's a logical way for the ability to work. And yeah, there is where the introduction happens. And she immediately is just like, can you come with me? Let's go talk somewhere away from all the boys. And so they go in to kind of sit on the bed and have girl talk while all the boys are left on the couch they basically play video games, is what happens here. And yeah, we again, more back and forth, because anytime Kawaki and Boruto say anything, Demon speaks up to sort of defend anything said about Ada. And Boruto's just like, hey, I think we should stop this. I don't think Ada wants anyone really fighting. But then we get into the scene here. And I actually think this is quite decent. I know some people are probably going to be slightly annoyed by it because it's leaning a little bit more into the shipping stuff, in that with Ada, they seem to have brought a direct romance into the main plot as a actual plot element. I get the frustration, especially when it comes to, I'd say, Sarada especially, that every character seems to just keep asking her the question of just like, hey, do you like Boruto? But I like this because it actually, you get a moment to see Ada just kind of talk normally to people as best she can and reveal more of, I suppose, how her abilities really like impact her on like a more day-to-day basis, and what she wants, and the curse of her powers, basically. So she just talks about how she, freezes, and her heart starts racing every time she's around and speaking to Kawaki. She feels like it's true love. We do see that at the very least, Ada's abilities work to a certain degree. It might be only a very minor degree on Sumire and Sarada, but they are both sort of blushing anytime they do kind of glance across at her. But it does seem like both of them are able to roughly sort of compose themselves and kind of stay in the moment in a specific scene. But it highlights that it's not that they're immune to her abilities like Kawaki and Boruto are. They don't seem to at all suffer any effect of anything. Whereas it seems like with them, there's at least something happening. It's just not fully taking over. And you can see that by the fact that Sarada has that moment where she glances over and it's just like, what an incredible force. It's overwhelming, as if she's struggling to kind of compose herself. And like part of this might be the fact that, they go in and they're expecting to be charmed, and so they're in this sort of like very close proximity to her, and they're adding on to this themselves. And then when they calm down, they just realize that, wait, nothing's actually happening here. What's actually going on here? But yeah, Ada asks, like, what do you think about all this? And she's like, yeah, I think that's what happens to everyone when they find true, and she was going to say love. Sumire is like, may I call you Ada? And she's like, yeah, of course, that'd make me happy. And she asks, what is it that you like about Kawaki? And her reasons are like, one, he's an Otsutsuki who won't be swayed by my ability, obviously. But to be honest, I don't really know myself. Just thinking about him, she can't really express in words why it is that she feels this way, which I guess is the reason why it is this sense of like her struggling to realize that, oh yeah, I think it actually probably is love. And then we get, I'm a little bit like, wait. What's actually happening here? How are they communicating with each other? I'm guessing it's still the kind of Ino or the kind of communication core facilitating this, but they're talking to each other here, with Ada not able to keep track of what they're saying here. And it's basically, Sumire reveals, it's just a hunch, but are you not affected by Ada's charm, Sarada? And Sarada's just like, I hadn't noticed it all because it was so tense, but I might actually be fine. I'm not captivated by her. So I think what I mentioned earlier on is just that, like, I think they just kind of worked themselves into the situation where they felt they were going to be entranced by her and sort of made it happen themselves when they weren't actually like at all. Now there probably, I think, is some sense, as we'll ultimately get to, I suppose, with whatever the answer is, that it probably is some minor effect that they do actually have. But the result is that Oh yeah, Sumire also isn't affected by Ada's charm either. So what's going on here? In all of this, because they realize that the only reason she's brought us in to have this conversation is, I think, because she expects us to be charmed by her to a certain degree, and if we just say we aren't, she might like that in some ways, but she also might see us as a security threat to allow us to be this close. So the kind of discussion here is like, I guess we just have to act like we are captivated by her. That's the only way to actually make this work, so that we can guarantee we actually have this sort of close relationship with Ada, where she's willing to have these one-on-one kind of conversations with her. In the middle of all this, Ada does ask Sarda, like, oh, what do you think about Boruto? And interesting, right after she sort of calmed down about this, she does actually blush about this. So again, they seem to be leaning in that direction, which I don't really inherently have a problem with. Yes, I would like the manga and the anime to have a little bit more Sarda character focus, but I don't inherently have an issue with an endgame thing being Sarda and Boruto being a relationship. I'm not going to say I full on ship it, because I tend to only really lean in that direction when the show properly commits to doing it that way, and it's very unclear. This still feels like sort of classic shonen thing where it's just a lot of blushing and nothing is actually going to happen for a very long time with it. So that's that whole thing. And yeah, we discussed the whole Ada might deem them security risks and so on. Sarda is just like, oh, my heart's pounding, and acting like that's the case. And Ada does say, I really hate this cursed ability. Thanks to it, I can't have an ordinary boyfriend. I can't even hope for ordinary friends. And it's this very just like, vulnerable kind of moment for Ada, where she just reveals this is what having this ability kind of leads to, is that she is lonely to a certain degree, because she never has true relationships with like most people, and she always wishes for that to be the case. And it's this weird dynamic where Sarda realizes in this moment that I can be that real friend to her, but I also understand, for the security sake of the village, I can't really tell her that in case she becomes really suspicious of me. So it's an interesting dynamic they're playing with here. Ultimately, they do report to Shikamaru to basically be like, hey, both of us are immune to her charms, like, what do we do here? Basically. We do see Demon and Boruto are playing video games here, and Boruto is winning. So he loses every time he tries to fight Demon, but he wins every time they play video games. So that's obviously their dynamic that they have going on. So Ada hasn't noticed that they're not super affected by her charms and stuff like that. And yeah, make sure Demon doesn't know that this is the case, especially. Because Shikamaru points out that if her charm doesn't work on you, it means it's possible for you to kill her at some point if we need to. If they catch on, your lives might be in danger. And basically, don't tell anyone else, because if too many people know, this will get leaked out and it will ruin any potential advantage we have in case Ada becomes too much of a security risk that we might have to take her out. So Sarda eventually does say, Ada, I don't dare to hope to be your number one. I know that's not possible. And I'm no Otsutsuki, so how about we just be ordinary friends? And it's an interesting one, because it's obviously like she's partially acting there like she is sort of charmed, and it's like, I'll follow all your rules and I'll be as close to you as kind of possible thing. But trying to lean into the direction of like, maybe I'm partially resistant to your charms and this could actually be like a real friendship. It's a kind of fine line in terms of what direction they're properly heading in ultimately. And yeah, they're like, you two can get in close to Ada without raising the alarm and catch her by surprise. In the future, if Konoha were to determine that Ada is an enemy, the ones to bring her down may very well be you two. So interesting stuff. And then at that point, we cut back to Boruto, who's having an inner dialogue with Momoshiki again. And he says, "Ah, I have it now. The identity of her charm's power." And then we don't address it again. So that's super interesting. Like, he doesn't tell Boruto what it is. So what's going on now? So is this just a case of, like, it is one of the abilities, that one of these kind of, divine jutsus that we know about from the previous chapter. It's just being used in a weird way through Ada, but Momoshiki is actually familiar with it. Or is it some other ability that maybe comes from the enemies of the Otsutsuki or something like that? I'm not really sure what to make of this, but at the very least they're kind of confirming now that, okay, it didn't immediately come across as one of those divine techniques, but now he does know what it is. And there's something significant to the fact that he does. And again, it's Boruto trying to be like, what did you just say? And Momoshiki's just like, don't concern yourself. Our thoughts merely crossed over a little bit again. I was just talking to myself. And he heads off. He doesn't respond to Boruto. And Boruto gets angry, like, I won't let you. But in reality, Kawaki is looking right at Boruto as Boruto is having this, like, quite intense reaction to basically something going on in his head. So he's like, who are you talking to? You're there, aren't you? Quit skulking around and come out, Otsutsuki Momoshiki. So this relates to a scene from, like, how many chapters ago was it? Was it the end of chapter 74 or the one before that, where we also had this moment of, like, Kawaki feeling like he saw a glimpse of Momoshiki or something like that. So at least they're getting this out of the way of, like, this has come straight out, and that unless they make this last an eternity, this reveal probably is going to have to come out here, that Boruto does just admit that, like, oh yeah, Momoshiki's in my mind, and then how do we react to that? Because this is significant because of the last Kawaki scene in the chapter where he said his new main enemy effectively is not the karma mark itself, but the Otsutsuki. So if he finds out that Boruto literally has basically a part of an Otsutsuki alive within him, that could take over at any second, and they're working together in some weird way, Kawaki's not going to like that, and he's always going to view Boruto as being somewhat of a threat, because apart from the two of them themselves being, Otsutsuki, like having Otsutsuki DNA, Momoshiki right now is the only actual Otsutsuki, like, involved in the story as such. So you would understand why Kawaki would focus his attention on this specific fact. Now, what exactly comes of this will be interesting because, there's a lot of moving parts currently at play here in terms of what is eventually going to happen to Boruto coming up very soon that will cause him to be sort of, like, vilified by everyone around him. Well, if it becomes clear that, maybe he's working with Momoshiki, if that's what gets spread around the place, is that Boruto, like, agrees with Momoshiki on something and they're planning to do something together, that would probably make the rest of the village go like, wait, what are you doing? But we don't know exactly what that kind of is yet. So I don't know, if Kawaki just reacts to this in the wrong way, this could create an issue. That's one thing that could happen. Ada in all of this, they've also set up, like, is also willing to completely sell Boruto out. If she was to maybe come out with some sort of a thing where, like, she, in the middle of all of this, like, decides that, wait, do you have an Otsutsuki inside you? No, I don't like you. Her powers mean that she basically gains control over nearly the rest of the entire village. So is that something? I'm not sure. At the very least, I think we're probably going to get, I think at least the core of the next 2-3 chapters will still be more like this, where it is more character interaction between this, at this point, relatively large group of characters here. You do wonder when stuff like, when is the potential resurrection of Amado's daughter actually going to happen? Is that planned for like next week, next day, sometime in the future? What exactly are we doing here? When is the code attack coming in? But I think for now, the reason you did most of the setup in this chapter was for the sake of getting Sumire and Sarada as actual friends of Ada, and making a big deal of the fact that they are immune to her charms as well. Now, as for that question, I said I think I have an idea about why this is the case. The obvious one is just that Sarada is an Uchiha. You track the Uchiha lineage back as far as it can go, and you get to an Otsutsuki member. That's the basically origin of a lot of these fancy jutsus, especially the ocular ones that are literally ones that seem to come directly from the Otsutsukis. So the Uchiha with the Sharingan, which is like the kind of proto-Rinnegan, makes complete sense about she comes from one of the most powerful kind of human clans that does stem back to an Otsutsuki. Is that why she's immune? Is that because Sarada has the potential to be a very, very powerful shinobi, and already is to a certain degree? Is that why she's immune? Now, if you take that logic and apply it to Sumire, why is that the case? Well, there is some weirdness, of course, about the whole Nue thing, and that's her kind of main jutsu and connection to things. And Nue itself is a very kind of weird, unusual kind of power, effectively, that she has. Is that the answer on her side? I'm not really sure, because that would also suggest then that Sasuke should be immune to her powers, that Naruto should also be immune to her powers, that Hinata should be, Himawari should be also, because they all come from effectively Hyuga clan, the Uzumaki clan, which is like related to like the Senju clan, which again all are the ones with more direct connections to Otsutsuki. Whereas of course a lot of the other shinobis are more just, they have specific they have chakra, so they can use jutsu, but each clan just seems to have a special like jutsu that's not inherently one of the, divine techniques as such. It's just a jutsu associated with a clan. And I think that's why, for instance, the Nara clan, which we view as being a relatively powerful clan, Shikadai gets hit. Shikamaru does still get affected by Ada, but can sort of hold it back, but it's not the same level of just pure immunity that Otsutsukis have, Boruto Kawaki, and then the same level of immunity that Sarada and Sumire seem to have here in this scene. The question I suppose I still have coming out of all of this is, what is the ultimate direction with Ada? Like, when we get post-time skip, like, what is Ada doing? Is Ada still around in the story, and what is she up to? That's what I'm really struggling to picture right now, because I'm almost kind of leaned in the direction of being like, oh yeah, all this will just be dealt with and we'll be just in a time skip with none of these characters involved. But I don't think all of them are just going to be killed off and stuff like that. So it feels like Ada probably has to stick around, I guess. So, and again, there's probably some reveal about what the nature of her other ability is. That's why Momoshiki teased it. So maybe there's some sense for like, she doesn't like the ability, so she's never really looked into harnessing it herself, because it just happens automatically. So maybe it is, I think I might have given this speculation in my speculation video for this chapter, of like, what if it is just sort of a more neutral, like mind control like ability that just activates on its own as being a charm ability. That might be where some of the confusion comes in. And Ada's maybe more dangerous than we actually think. I don't know. But they seem to be leaning in the direction of wanting you to have some sympathy for her. That the whole potential, actual, real friendship with Sarada is something kind of meaningful. But at the same time, they're really leaning in the direction of, and you two will kill her if she goes against the village. So what way to view that? Because again, if Code does attack, what do these two do? And this is where, even though a lot of these chapters can be sort of frustrating because it doesn't feel like they used the 40 pages that effectively, because it's a month between chapters, and I think most people don't particularly enjoy the monthly format. There's still a lot of potential in this story to do really, really strong things, but they refuse to really tackle a lot of that stuff most of the time. And that's why last chapter was so good, and why I think you're probably going to see a bit of a shift in towards a little bit more negativity, that it's just a sort of, is this just a return to its usual average form here? I still see some potential, but I'd like there to be a little bit more kind of continuity almost between the chapters. That, you know, why did the information dump just end like instantaneously as we went from chapter to chapter here? I just felt that there was way more to actually go into, in that, like, is the whole God Otsutsuki reveal from the last chapter, is that something that will be meaningful soon, or is that for the long-term future of the series? I don't even know. But overall, like I said, I thought that this was a pretty good chapter. I think it's important with a character like Ada to highlight that there are these other sides to her character, and that is that more kind of emotional, vulnerable side to, she doesn't like her powers because it means she struggles to actually have true dynamics with people. But it is also meant that she is this quite demanding and commanding person because she's used to being able to order people around because they follow her. So she's this weird kind of enigmatic character who has so much control but almost desires not having that control. And she overall has no particular goal that will necessarily cause anyone any pain or chaos, but she has the potential, if swayed by the wrong person, to lead to complete destruction. And that's what's so, I think, interesting about the character of Ada, is that her main motivation is just romance, as it appears right now, and nothing else. There is an interest in the fact that there is no deeper underlying goal or ambition beyond just potentially have an actual relationship with someone who doesn't succumb to her ability. So they're my thoughts on the chapter. I'd say good but not great. A step down, but an understandable step down from the previous chapter. But I still think room for improvement. That we shouldn't view the last chapter as being so much of an outlier they can never do that again, and just kind of want a higher standard with this manga, because it's right at the end of the year. Okay, they delivered a couple of chapters that are actually quite good, but what about the chapters from like earlier on in the year, the middle of the year, that really were spinning their wheels? We have to be aware that we were in a rough spot for a couple of months, and a couple of good chapters doesn't immediately negate that they're consistently not where they need to be. There needs to be a consistent strength to this manga that I don't think it has had a lot of the time. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on chapter 76 of Boruto. They've been my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.